Broadcasting to you live from the Milky Way galaxy, the solar system, planet Earth, North America, the United States of America, California, Los Angeles to be specific. Hello everybody, welcome. This is another episode of Agree to Disagree on the TNAM network, because the news always matters. Dan Johnson is our guest today. Dan has been coming on our show for years and years and years and years. How many years now? I'll ask Dan in just a second exactly how many years, but it's been a while. So all that content can be found. It's archived on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/The New American Media, if you'd like to go check that out. Click subscribe, get notifications, leave comments on our 7 years of content. We are on patreon.com/The New American Media if you like what we're doing and would like to help support us. It's like a PBS funding drive, apparently. Instagram.com/The New American Media. Our meme game is strong. So follow us there. We're on Facebook. The group is called The New American Media. You know, that's what the page is called. There's a group for Agree to Disagree. That's a private group, so you got to submit for that. And on Twitter, we're at American_media_. Dan Johnson crossed my radar many moons ago, and Dan has been working to make things better in various capacities, and now he's working with a group called We Do Better. So Dan, welcome back to the program. I guess for the people who are not familiar with you, maybe if you could kind of reset us on how long we've been doing shows and the groups that you've started along the way and what that has led you to today.
Well, Brian, you were the first radio show I was ever on.
We're number one.
This entire segment's going to make me feel old.
It's about the only. By the way, Dan, it's about the only room where Dan will feel old. How young are you again?
I am currently 24.
Exactly. So this kid's been working for several years. So we did the first radio show ever. In that, once you broke the seal, though, you were doing a whole bunch of stuff from then on. So what kind of stuff did you get into?
So my first organization, People Against the NDAA. Basically, there's a law in existence in the United States right now that allows the president to say, hey, you're a suspected terrorist, I'm going to detain you without a charge, without a trial, and lock you up, just like FDR did to the Japanese Americans in 1942. It's the exact same authority, and it violates every provision of the Constitution basically in existence. I had started a group, People Against the NDAA, that originally brought me on this show. And started with Bowling Green State University and went your alma mater.
Yes, sir.
And went to local city council, and they turned us down. So decided to start a nationwide movement instead. At our peak, we probably had about 30,000 or so people working with us. We passed legislation from coast to coast, basically saying, hey, you can't use the laws of war here, and we will defend our citizens and go after any federal official with kidnapping, assault, battery, etc. charges. You can't come in here and detain someone without a trial. You'll be treated like anybody else who tries. And so from there, I realized there was a greater need than just that one issue. Found the Solutions Institute, an activist training center. And Brian, you were a part of at least a couple of our activist training conferences, which all sold out. We trained about 70-something organizations around the country. And the next organization, the Tax Revolution Institute, which eventually morphed into We Do Better, we stopped or helped stop the IRS from going after organizations for daring to talk about political issues. And now I'm here at We Do Better, where the point is the vast majority of human needs are addressed and the vast majority of public services are provided by nonprofits, for-profits, informal groups, i.e. we the people. The vast majority of our resources, however, are going to the government. That is an imbalance that has to change, and that is what we're working to do at We Do Better.
All right. Man, there's a lot to unpack in there. You covered PANDA pretty well, the National Defense Authorization Act. I think that speaks on its own. We've done entire shows on that. If you're interested, click back through the archived content, search Engelman, Dan Johnson. You'll see a bunch of videos come up. Solutions Institute, yes, I was a part of that and training people. I still have I still do some mentoring and some checking in with folks from that group, just to kind of see how they're going with their goals. And Tax Revolution Institute. I guess that's the place we can start unpacking everything. When you went away from People Against NDAA, the Panda Group, that was a piece of misguided, illegal legislation. And so you went after that. You moved over to solutions, saying, okay, the solution to stuff like that is building grassroots organizations that are doing good stuff and they're having an impact on the legislation. And then you bumped over there to the very specific area of taxes. Talk about why you kind of made that jump, because you're in the realm of all these sports, but one is tennis, one's golf, one's soccer, one's hockey, one's basketball, one's baseball. Why did you make the move to taxes?
Because taxes is the referee association.
They're the referees.
At the end of the day, there's no law in existence that's going to prevent you from being picked up off the street and detained without a trial. There's no law in existence that's going to protect a nonviolent drug user from being arrested, even after marijuana is made legal. There's no law in existence that will keep police from beating someone up in the street, and no law in existence that will keep any government agency anywhere from being corrupt. However, the juice that runs that entire machine is taxation. They know that regardless of their results, regardless of how they treat their quote-unquote customers, that they will get the exact same amount of money next year, fundamental flaw number 2 on WeDoBetter.org's website. At the end of the day, the thing that separates government from any other entity on earth is government is the only institution where resources do not follow results. And that is because, specifically, of taxation. If I know that I don't have to earn your money, I know I will get the same amount every year, regardless of my results, then I will continue to do what I want to do, regardless of how it affects, harms, or helps you. And taxation, to me, was, if we've figured out there's a way to go about making effective change, state and local level, through PANDA, that way can be used in multiple issues, as you said, the multiple sports, what we need next is, what kind of change do we actually want to effect? And that was the Tax Revolution Institute.
Okay. And you said something there. I kind of want to unpack it. I want to kind of see where we're at on this particular part. You were saying, regardless of how they treat their customers, they get the same funding, and that kind of got me thinking. In what ways is that similar or dissimilar, would you say, to tenure in a college campus, for example?
Well, in the case of tenure, if it's let's make the distinction between public and private colleges, though. If I, as a director of a private college, tell you, the teacher, that if you work for me for X amount of time, then I'm going to give you tenure and I'm going to allow you to be here regardless of your results. Now, I don't exactly know why I'd want to do that. Maybe you're just that good that I need you here and that's the only thing I can entice you with. Certainly, it is not the smart decision of a business owner or of a nonprofit leader or whatever I am to say, hey, after a certain period of time, you no longer have to produce results for me. Usually, that's not a smart decision, but let's say that it is. Then, yes, that tenured teacher is not going to deliver results because they don't have to, or not likely. The incentive is not there for them to deliver results. But I may have gotten so much out of them before tenure that it's worth it to me. That's an acceptable trade-off.
Do you mean?
However, now,
okay.
Go ahead.
No, keep going. I'll remember my point.
However, now take a public school. This public school is funded by people who didn't choose to fund said school. And because they didn't choose to fund said school, when the head of a public school makes an agreement with a teacher at a public school that they no longer have to deliver results after a certain time, they have tenure, then the people who fund that public school, if they disagree with that decision, they can't do anything about it. The difference between the two is In one case, I, the head of this private school, can be punished by my customers for choosing to allow one of my employees to no longer deliver them a service. In a public school, I cannot be punished for choosing not to let them deliver a service. So in one case, it's only the teacher that doesn't have to deliver the service, and in the other case, it's the entire system that doesn't have to deliver the service, and tenure is just making it worse, adding on top of that.
Interesting. And then I had a couple points. I tried not to jump in to address them because I wanted to get your full thoughts. So let me circle back to them. Are you saying that is that somewhat similar to how a Supreme Court justice is selected and then they're basically appointed for life? It's kind of based on the previous results of what you've done. It's your lifetime achievement award, kind of like when they gave Kobe Bryant $25 million in his last washed up season that was injury plagued, and he was just saying goodbye to everybody on the road. He wasn't worth $25 million at that point, but he had done so much for the organization. They gave him the $25 million. Would you say those are similar, or there's some important distinctions to make on those two?
Again, I would say the only difference is when the president appoints a Supreme Court justice for life, if 49% of the people of the country are unhappy with that appointment, they can't do anything about it. And anything under 49% of the voting population can't do anything about it, and nobody can do anything about it right then unless it's the end of the president's term. So you have all these caveats as to the level of accountability you can have with voting for and against that president, especially if the president is in their second term. They know, I'm just going to appoint this justice and nobody can do anything about it, so I'll just appoint one who I know is going to defend my agenda for the rest of their lives. And they'll do that. In the case of Kobe Bryant and the baseball team, the head of the baseball team still knows that if they take a bunch of money and throw it at Kobe Bryant and is Kobe Bryant baseball? I think I'm confusing my sports.
No, basketball. That's Lakers. I don't know where the baseball came from, but yeah, he won titles with Shaq. He got, he brought stuff, and there's an economic argument wondering if you sell enough merch to recoup it, blah blah blah, all of that stuff. But then there's just, look, you're Kobe freaking Bryant. You're a first ballot Hall of Famer. You brought us multiple championships. Yeah, we'll pay you the max in your final year, and we know you're washed up and not going to play, but you earned it over the course of your contract. Here's a nice bonus. It's not a smart business move, but it's a good move to take care of your players and, something like that.
And in the end, that may be a smart business move. In the end, that may be what convinces some of the top talent from some of the other college teams to sign with the Lakers instead of to sign with anybody else. Because they know, look, if I put in a lot of work with this organization, at the end of the day, if I'm really good, they might actually reward me if I can't play anymore. Like that is also possibly a smart business move. But at the end of the day, the point is, if the head of the Lakers, the head coach, head owner, whatever of the Lakers goes, hey, we're going to pay a bunch of money to this guy, they still have to think about what will happen to the money they're receiving if they make the wrong decision. Whereas the president, in many cases, does not. And that would be the only difference.
And we remember seeing Michael Jordan play a final year on the Wizards. That was weird. You don't want to see Jordan in a Wizards jersey. A lot of these players, they do bounce around at the end of their career, but there's something really cool about, raised here, plays here, stays here. There's something awesome about, a player not having to bounce to the Phoenix Suns to make that last $25 million because they still want to play and they're not what they once used to be. But you don't want to see him in a Suns jersey, and then your fan base is going, why'd you get rid of Kobe? This team is so cheap. There is a lot of negative backlash that would happen in those cases, but then there's pragmatists that would look at that and just say, hey, it's dollars and cents, and we're trying to win. He won. That's past tense. We need to look forward and moving forward. But, those are the intricacies of something like that. But, I want to bounce this conversation over to some of the stuff you've done with We Do Better, and I want to talk about Puerto Rico specifically. But wrapping up this conversation about Supreme Court and tenure and Kobe, $25 million bonus, essentially, how is it similar or dissimilar to unions? Because there's government unions, there's an auto workers union, there's public and private unions. How are those similar and dissimilar as well? Because I think there's some distinctions that could be made, and I think there's some lessons we could learn too.
So, I do kind of feel that these questions are repeating. So I think that the important thing for your listeners to understand is simply if someone makes a decision and the people who are funding that decision are required, without their consent, to continue to support that organization or that person with their resources, then that will have the exact same effect as any type of government program in existence. If someone is not required to, then it won't have that effect. If you look at private versus public sector unions, a private union is the employers and the employees arguing back and forth and negotiating over what is a reasonable pay for those employees, both with the understanding that they must pick a pay that is reasonable enough so that the customers will continue supporting that business. The unions won't demand $500 an hour. The private companies won't demand 10 cents an hour for their employees. They both know that they have a mutual interest in mind, and that is the success and the continued thriving of that company so that the union members in that company get paid and the executives of that company also get paid. In the case of a public sector union, it is politicians and government employees arguing over how to split up money that isn't theirs and that they're going to continue to get regardless of how much they screw those people over. And so the big difference is unions are a corrective mechanism for overreaching business owners. Public sector unions are a mechanism by which politicians get more from the taxpayer because they continually pay more to the employees, and then they have, all of a sudden, not enough for the essential services they're supposed to be providing.
Yeah, it turns into that quid pro quo. Are you giving favorable support? If I do this, will you do that? And it's this little wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And it really is incestuous everywhere. It's one thing when good products are being delivered, good results are coming out. It's a good, solid, fair price for the money being spent on stuff. But you know, unless it's our first day of school, we've been around the block long enough to see plenty of examples of wasteful resource allocation and waste. And I want to talk to you a little bit about We Do Better and some of the stuff that you did, some of the projects you've been working on. So before we get into Puerto Rico and all these different things that you've been doing, tell us the websites and the areas where you really want people to connect with you. You already mentioned WeDoBetter.org. Is that the main hub? Are there also Twitter sites, Instagram, Facebook? What's the best way to stay in touch with what you're working on now?
Yeah, absolutely. If they go to WeDoBetter.org, there should be a pop-up. They can sign up for the newsletter. That's the best way to make sure that you get all of the most recent information and also opportunities and chances to take action. Like coming up here in 1 week in California, we'll have a bill that we'll probably talk about a little bit later in the program. The second way, Facebook, we're continually posting examples of organizations that do better on our Facebook page. That's Facebook, just search We Do Better, and the same on Twitter, search We Do Better there. And then you can Google We Do Better, and I'm sure we have other accounts somewhere that I'm not controlling.
Yeah, well, that's decentralized. You got different tentacles all over. That's always a good thing. So it can't be taken down from one source. You mentioned the thing coming up in California. Yes, that is a teaser. Yes, we will get to that. But real quick, give us the elevator pitch on it. If you hop on the elevator, you got Spielberg, you have an idea. You might have 45 seconds to pitch something to him. Tell us about what's happening in California. Tell us what you want to have happen, and then we'll circle back and get the full story. I want to make sure people get a chance to hear the bullet point on that at least.
There are many ways of addressing human needs in the United States. They include government, for-profits, nonprofits, informal groups, etc. The vast majority of those needs are actually addressed by nonprofits, for-profits, informal groups, i.e. we the people. The vast majority of our resources, however, are going to the government. There's a problem with that. An organization in San Diego known as Saved in America is an example of one of these organizations. They're former SEALs, law enforcement officers, private investigators, and their number one and only job is finding missing children. Compared to law enforcement searches that can take 3 to 4 weeks and still never find the child, they find children on an average of 9 days each, and by spending less than $7,000 per child versus millions of dollars for a manhunt. This is the type of organization, and many others like it, in all areas: food, medical, shelter, support, law enforcement, communication, education, in many areas that I would like people of the state of California and people around the country to be able to support, to be able to back, to be able to find, and to be able to work with in their communities. At the end of the day, the way individuals work together to solve problems in our society is through organizations, through collectives. We want people to be able to work with and empower those collectives in their community, ultimately empowering their community to do better for everyone in their community, their county, their city, and their state.
Man, well, okay, that's a great way to sum up what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what you're looking for. What is the bill exactly that's coming up? Tell us the name of that one in California.
The bill in California, introduced by California State Senator Mike Morrell, is SB 1485. That's Senate Bill 1485. It is coming up for a vote in the State Governance and Finance Committee, chaired by Senator Mike McGuire from the Coast, Santa Rosa area. And it will be voted on at 10 a.m. on May 16th in room 112. If you're in California and Northern California and you're able to make it to that room, it would be great to have you in the audience. The deadline for bills to pass over, I think, is around May 18th or so. So we have to bring a strong showing to that hearing in order to get the committee to move. If we get about 50 people to show up in the room, they'll have to take us incredibly seriously.
And you said, I heard you mention Santa Rosa, but if you're saying they're voting on, is this something up in Sacramento? Where is the room 112? Where is this at?
Yeah, the room 112 in the California state capitol. It's on the old side of the building. It's on the Senate side. All the details, if you go to Facebook and you just type in "flood the committee" for SB 1485, you should find the event. All the details and information is there. But yeah, having people show up in Sacramento is where they need to be. The reason I brought up Santa Rosa is that is the home district of the chair of the committee, who we must flip in order to get this bill through.
Oh, okay, so he's staunchly on one side. Okay, or maybe not staunchly, but he's at least flipped means you know where he's at. Is he staunchly? Is he a union hack? Is he what's his deal? Why is he not considering this?
Politics is petty. A Republican is introducing the bill. He's a Democrat. That's as simple as it gets. If we can flip him by showing him that people in his district, people around the state are watching, and they're making their decisions based on how he votes, we'll be able to overcome that basic pettiness. But that's basically what it is.
And so SB 1485, it does what exactly? How much does that allow you to opt out of? What's the math on that?
SB 1485 allows any taxpayer in California to donate up to $500 anytime throughout the year to charities, to 501c3 charities, and then to take $500 at the end of the year off of their income tax bill. So it's a $500 direction. In Arizona, with their $200 direction, after about 20 years in place or so it was 2016, 130,000 taxpayers directed $52 million to organizations with the right amount of promotion and advocacy. We could see about $250 million going to organizations in communities that are actually serving people.
Wow. Now, there's nothing to limit when you say organizations in the communities that are actually serving people. There's really no limit to which type of organizations could get that funding, though, right?
Correct.
So it doesn't need to be a good group;
Correct.
It could be a bad group.
So the bill allows you, if you are already a 501c3 registered with the IRS and located in the state of California, then people can send their money to you. The IRS already places several restrictions on private benefit, public benefit of charities. They require certain things of charities, regulations that are all reasonable to ensure that this money is going toward a public need. And of course, there'll be fraud. There will be fake charities set up, and there are fake charities set up. In fact, the California state government attempted to set up a fake charity this year called the California Excellence Fund, which was basically, we're going to give you, the taxpayer, a credit, exactly what we're doing. We're going to give you the taxpayer credit, but you can only donate to one charity, and that charity is the California Excellence Fund, and it just so happens to be run and appropriated by the California legislature, i.e. we're renaming the general fund a charity to get around Trump's tax bill, and everybody should be able to donate to that.
Wow.
So instead of setting up a new fake charity, we're saying, look, they're already in the communities, and when government sets up a fake charity, or when a government department is abusive, you should actually be able to take your money and put it somewhere else. You can't do that now, and the benefit to a taxpayer in being able to choose the organizations to support, and the benefit to the community in being able to choose those organizations to support, is just so monumental that it's hard to even track down. I mean, we have a anti-human trafficking organization called Generate Hope in San Diego. They're huge supporters of this. For $40,000, they do what just about no other organization does, and they take in a woman who has been illegally trafficked, and they provide a full spectrum of care. This includes everything from financial education, therapy, housing. This includes anything, mental health, hygiene, anything that this woman would need to be able to, after such a traumatic experience, transition back into society, and they're able to do it for $40,000 a person. There's not a single state program that does all of those things for women who are trafficked, and certainly not for only $40,000 a person. It might cost $40,000 a person just for the shrink, not to mention everything else. So, people being able to direct their money to this organization, it can help solve human trafficking. You can help solve missing children. You can direct money to a food bank and help address hunger in your community. All of the options are there. We don't even know how good it can be, but we have some examples, and those examples kind of just by themselves should carry the day.
Yeah, in what you talked about, that group Saved in America, I'm not really familiar with them, but it's one of the issues I feel most strongly about. It's one of the most black and white cases of evil that roams this planet. It's the people that abuse children, and it's something that's very important that we spend time on. But like you said, it's more important that you work with the SEALs and the PIs and law enforcement, that you appropriately allocate your time and resources, that you don't burn through millions and millions and have very slow results. You need people that are local, that can act local, that can get stuff done and get people brought back to safety. I mean, is that a group you've worked with closely, or it's just one particular example off the top of your head? Because it sounds really good on the surface, what you were just pitching to me right there.
It's Generate Hope we've worked with, but Saved in America specifically, I just know their data. I don't think I've ever even talked to anybody over there, but I know their data and I know their reputation, and that's what matters.
Right. Yeah, and you were talking about charities that were a little sketchy. I mean, we heard for several years about after the disaster in Haiti. The Clinton Global Initiative raking in hundreds of millions of dollars of funds, and a lot of feedback saying that this money is not being filtered back to this population. Where is it going? Why is there a slush fund for this? So I guess that kind of brings me back to the Puerto Rico angle. I know I wanted to talk about, tell me about some of the projects and some of the stuff that you've had a chance to do, to go around and see different communities working, different communities struggling, different communities succeeding. Because, the natural disasters is a great place to start, because we've had our fair share of them over the past few years, for sure.
So I do briefly want to address the Clinton thing. So we refused to work. We were suggested to work with the Clinton Foundation in our Puerto Rico disaster relief efforts, and we flat out refused to work with them because they do not direct the money that is directed toward them toward relief. They'll fund a couple big projects, get a lot of press, and then use the rest of the money, as you said, kind of a political slush fund. So
now, who suggested that you work with them? Was it local? Was it a local Puerto Rican official that was running a department, or who suggested you work with them? Or was it suggested like a horse's head that you woke up next to? You better work with them because you're not getting your own stuff done here. Was it a little of both, or which is more accurate?
Well, I like the horse's head story for dramatization purposes, but
that's what I do.
It was other national charities.
Oh, okay.
That it was not locals, it was not local officials, it was other national charities. So I'm not even sure if I would disparage the national charities who made the suggestion, because if the money shows up and you can help people with it, whether the money comes from Jesus or Satan himself, it certainly seems nice to be able to direct that money toward the right people. But at the end of the day, we just know that their intentions aren't pure, so it doesn't make any sense for us to work with them. That said, you can probably name less than 10 corrupt charities off the top of your head. And I might encourage you to try, but most people can't name many more than 5 or 10, many more than 5 in many cases, corrupt charities. But if I asked you to name federal, state, or local departments that were corrupt over the past 5 years, we would be here all day. And the reason for that is if the Red Cross is a good example because they're not supported by a lot of politicians or government officials like the Clinton Foundation is. If the Red Cross, say, delivers shoddy meals in Puerto Rico, or they build only a couple houses in Haiti with the money that they're given, people simply will choose to send their money elsewhere. If the Department of Housing and Urban Development loses, and prepare yourself for this number, loses $2 trillion over 10 years. Loses, just gone, like disappeared into thin air. Treasury transfers that don't have an end game.
So that's like
or don't have an.
That's like Donald Rumsfeld style losing $1 trillion right around 9/11. Just poof! I don't know where that trillion went. By the way, I'm sure you'll all be distracted by this real soon, and we can move on. Doesn't surprise me in the least. It doesn't surprise me in the least. I've worked closely with different agencies that work in housing, in funding, and low income, and man, the amount of incompetence, intentional neglect, dereliction of responsibilities, the snail's pace of it all, and the wasted resources and funds. It is mind blowing. So no, I'm prepared for the $2 trillion. I'm ready for that.
So, but the reason why it's $2 trillion and not $2 billion is because when they fuck up, they just get more money. And that is the big difference between when you are able to choose who you send your tax dollars to and when you have to use tax dollars to support the government. So I didn't want to take too much time on that, but I did want to fully address that point.
Well, no, and that's good, and I'm glad that you did, and I'm glad you also left me a pregnant pause there before we get into Puerto Rico and some of the stuff you've seen and what you've worked with, because now you got me circling back to another question. As I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking about, if you screw up in government, you do it again next time. There's no repercussions, but this is something you said. Arizona did this. They had it was a $200 yearly. You could have $130,000. I'm sorry, 130,000 taxpayers redirected $52 million over the course of, what did you say? That was 10 years. Over the course of 10 years.
No, $52 million last year.
Oh, wait, that was last year. Okay. Is this happening in every state, or is this what you're trying to do in every state? Is this something Tax Revolution Institute was starting to do, and then you shifted to We Do. Where else is this working in our 50 states?
Arizona is the only
Oh.
example of the program actually in existence.
All right, and is that generally well received by the community, by the public, by the political leaders? Is it actively being fought by the SEIU and the purple shirts? Are they like what does it feel like in Arizona to the people that are participating in it? Is it under attack or is it cheered and lauded?
So anyone who wants to learn a little bit more about Arizona, including the answer to this question, can go to wedobetter.org and find a little bit of that, or a lot more detail than what I'm about to give you. But there was an article in azcentral.com, which is Arizona's big state newspaper. And it was called Arizona's $400 million love-hate relationship with tax credits. And they interviewed several representatives and senators, and they found they all hate them. The vast majority of politicians in Arizona hate tax credits, and the charitable one is one of them.
Is that?
But a bipartisan bill at the end of 2016 was signed by the governor to double the size of the charitable tax credit.
Was that 100 to 200, or that's 200 to 400?
200 to 400.
Oh, okay.
One might ask, well, why? Because the charitable credit does something that no other piece of legislation does. Because it moves money to the very organizations that benefit from the credit, it creates not only a strong alliance between the taxpayers and nonprofits who are usually against each other, but it creates a strong incentive for the nonprofits to go lobby to defend and increase the credit. And it creates a strong incentive for the taxpayers to defend and increase the credit because they don't want their choice taken away as to where they want their money to go.
I like that,
and
because
so,
then you're getting all the grassroots organizations. You're getting all of those charities that are mobilizing, whether it's 50 people, whether it's 5 people meeting in a living room every, last Thursday of each month, or whether it's 50 people meeting every Tuesday, or whether it's 5,000 people across the area that are all they're either in Boy Scouts or Scouts. Oh, that's an issue. I got to ask you about that because you are a Scout. I know you have that background. I got to get your thoughts on it. But yeah, it's very interesting because what I'm saying is it'll make a coalition of the grassroots organizations to then band together and go all take their pitchforks out to the town and multiply the mess and be like, they're coming after our funding. And riling everybody up and then getting them, and then it turns into we the people having control of the resources and the allocation versus our overlords and masters redirecting it out to their scumbag friends who got them elected in the first place in a quid pro quo setup. I could see that. I could see the benefit there.
Exactly. And when we sat down with a Democratic co-sponsor of the bill, myself and Ford Fisher, who I think you also know,
Indeed.
We sat down and interviewed this Democratic state senator, and we figured he's a co-sponsor of the bill to double the credit. He's probably in favor of the credit. I mean, that's not an unreasonable assumption. But when we sat down with him, he made it very clear he didn't like the credit. He didn't like the fact that it took away, state control. And when I, came at him from an outcome standpoint, that don't we want the best outcomes for communities in Arizona, he was like, well, theoretically, that's what we're here for. And I love the fact he had to add theoretically. But I pressed him on it a little bit, and he was like, he's like, well, yeah, we're here to keep, the public services accountable. And I said, well, some people might, my favorite line of Donald Trump's, some people might argue that the taxpayer being able to direct their dollars to these organizations, that they might keep better track of the dollars because it's their money. And he paused for about 5 seconds. You could see him desperately, now that we had the moral high ground, you could see him desperately trying to figure out how to not call taxpayers stupid.
But he could shoot somebody in the middle of the street and his approval rating would go up. So, I mean, we also know that about him. But yes, please continue.
So at the end of the day, or at the end, in like 5 or 6 seconds, he eventually goes, well, I just don't believe that the taxpayers would follow their dollars to the charities. And at the end of the day, he was forced. He said it was a political decision to vote and to co-sponsor this bill. Well, the political decision is the nonprofits in his community gave him enough hell and said, you need to go sponsor this because we need resources, that it does something that has never been done in the history of liberty-related activism in the United States, which is it makes the politicians, it points out that the politicians are truly the ones going after and trying to hurt the women and children, and any attempts to go after and cut public services is actually gets a liberty-oriented response rather than a more government-oriented response.
Interesting. Interesting, because this just it brings to mind for me how I feel about some of these political conversations, when, especially in the libertarian-leaning wings, the small government-leaning wings of social media and whatnot. I do think that we need government. There's when you get into the libertarian, when you go down the wormhole of the libertarian philosophy, you're going to find it ends in anarchy. And that doesn't mean chaos. It doesn't mean Mad Max. It just means nobody's really, blindly empowered to, be in charge here. We're all kind of in charge of ourselves. I mean, maybe you'll have a different definition of anarchy, and that's fine if you want to add your 2 cents on that. But I really do. I've always felt that we need a focused in a limited government. I don't think anarchy is the answer. I think something very basic, very limited, very accountable, and very productive. I think that's what this country needs. I think that's what all of our local communities need. We need some sort of system that's local, productive, affordable, resourceful, and accountable. That's what when I talked with Ben Swan after what was going on in Ferguson. He said, yeah, Mike Brown, all right, fine, whatever. But he said this is also something. Mike Brown was the thing, that was the spark. But what was brewing here for a long time was all these fancy facilities being built off of shaking down all the people driving on the roads. And it was policing for profit. And it's people that don't live in those communities coming in from somewhere else, herding a bunch of stray cats, and taking them off for processing. If you feel like you're being hunted, because you literally are being hunted to be shaken down for thousands of dollars, yeah, I'm not surprised when the people, maybe even the Mike Brown case, the details of that case, if you look at the forensics, it wasn't this thing that Obama and the left-wing media wanted you to think it was, but it was the spark that got people who have really grown tired of being policed for profit to kind of band together and do stuff. Some of it bad, some of it productive, some of it yet to be determined. We'll see. But, the taxpayers, the people of the communities, deserve a certain amount of respect that is not being given, and accountability to resources that are being squandered. What are your thoughts on unpacking some of that stuff I just said?
So I would deliver an exact challenge to you and to all the anarchists, and the exact challenge is this: let's not place ideological limits or increases on government. What government does best, it should do best. What nonprofits do best, they should do best. What for-profits do best, they should do best.
And let them compete.
And the taxpayer, at the end of the day, should have the ability to decide which one does the best for their community. So, if one day, for example, you had replaced the local police department with a model like the Detroit Threat Management Center, which has been around for 20 years, 40-plus facilitators, they do not call them officers, has reduced violent crime in the neighborhoods they've been employed in Detroit by 90% each time, and has only fatally shot one person in its entire existence as a private security department, that even though they work in Crack Alley and some of the most dangerous parts of Detroit, that maybe in some cities, policing isn't something the government should do. Maybe it's something that an organization like that may be partnered with an organization like the Guardian Angels in New York that protects children on subways, the Red Hats, the Red Berets.
Oh, yeah.
that perhaps that's available, but at the end of the day, I might be able to say, look, there are organizations in your community. I might be able to pick out your community. Let's say you live in San Diego, saying your community, there are organizations right there, and there's this Saved in America thing. And you might say, yeah, spending that much and finding the children in 9 days is cool. But I think that a better deterrent for my community is when the police come out in force, and they're all over the news, and there's millions of dollars spent, but every single potential child kidnapper receives the full weight of the law. I want them to see that. I don't want there to be this small organization that goes and finds the kids. Fine, that's up to you and your community, but you should be able to choose where to send your resources. So our point is that you can have an ideological commitment to the method of addressing human needs, or you can have a moral commitment to the outcome, and we prefer the latter, and we prefer to empower people in a community to do the latter.
What is the name of that Detroit group that you mentioned again? What was that project? I want to look into that a little bit more.
That is the Detroit Threat Management Center, and you can find them and any organization that I mentioned on this broadcast at WeDoBetter.org. Scroll over Why We Do Better, and you'll see those who do better, and all of the organizations, including the data, is listed on that page.
Okay, and you said they've been around for 20 years doing their thing, so there's a lot of results we can study at this point.
That's correct.
Okay, good. Yeah, I like this. I like it. The main reason why I do radio shows and video interviews and whatever the case, I like having interesting conversations with interesting people so that I can find new breadcrumbs that'll take me down different paths that I wasn't currently investigating. I think some of these things, like Saved in America and the Detroit Threat Management Center, these sound pretty damn incredible. These sound like things I should learn a lot more about and do some more research on. So, yeah, thank you for letting me know about that. We're starting to kind of wind down here. We got about 13 minutes left, and there's so much more that we have yet to get into with Dan Johnson. Dan, what's your Twitter handle, by the way? Where are you most active? Are you on Facebook? Where to follow you?
I am most active. I'm most active on Facebook. You can find me, Daniel Johnson, and if you listen to Brian's show, we probably have like 300 mutual friends with each other already.
Yeah, I did not. It's funny in the Liberty community. When you all you have to do is click on someone to see the number of mutual friends, and you look at that top 6 or top 8, you go, oh, it's one of those liberty-loving kooks. All right, I'll add them. They got to be interesting at least. They have to be interesting and willing to participate in the conversation. You don't have to buy everything they're selling, but yeah, the mutual friends are pretty funny. You always know when it's somebody from the Liberty movement. Tell me about what you learned, Dan, in Puerto Rico. I got to find out. What's your takeaway from all of it? Obviously we could probably talk for hours, but to kind of summarize it and condense it a little bit. What did you learn? What do we need to know?
The director of FEMA should be brought up for trial for over 800 counts of manslaughter, at the very least. The first few days after a hurricane are the most devastating. They are when the streets are flooded, when people are out of food, water, electricity, when people are fearful for their family members, where most of the activities going on are emergency rescues, where if it's a big enough storm like the one in Puerto Rico, all of the emergency departments are unavailable because they're out saving their own skin and their own people and their own families. These are the most critical times when a nation, a state, a territory, when they need help from the outside because they simply cannot handle it and are not prepared for that type of disaster, especially of the magnitude of a Category 5 hurricane like Hurricane Maria. In the critical first few days after the hurricane, not only was FEMA slow, but to cover their asses, FEMA prohibited other organizations from delivering aid to the island. We had over 1 million pounds of aid sitting in our house for 2 weeks as people died.
Wait, say that again. You had
The
what?
official,
Sitting where?
we had over 1 million pounds of aid: water, medical supplies, food, diapers, everything, sitting in a warehouse in Miami, Florida, waiting. We had planes that were gassed up and ready to go. We had pilots for them. We had people ready to ship everything, and FEMA said no.
The reason they gave, the official reason they gave, what was the weaselly answer? Why would they refuse help?
FEMA's excuse was that the port was too full and we wouldn't get anything in there anyway. Well, I'll tell you what. We had planes that had parachute systems for water, for emergency water. They wouldn't even need to land. Just pop some parachutes like the U.S. Air Force popping supplies over the Berlin Wall. We had associations with, we actually had a undercover plan that I can talk about now because it didn't happen, with the Puerto Rican Air Force to pretend to do a training mission so that they could drop off supplies. Aguadilla Airport was open, available. They wouldn't let us use it. FEMA required us to, get authorization. Don't worry, we'll approve you eventually. And they did. It took them 2.5 weeks. But while the official death toll is at 86, a more realistic death toll that actually includes people who died not because they got hit by a flying telephone pole during the hurricane, but because their house flooded out and they had nowhere to go and they had no food and no water.
Or their insulin couldn't be refrigerated for 3 days without power, and they couldn't get a resupply. Yeah, anytime there's a disaster, the ancillary damage, I mean, it takes a little bit to actually calculate it, and you can fudge those numbers if you know what you're doing, for sure.
Yes. The actual numbers are much closer to 1,000 people. Well over 10 times.
That's just horrible. That's just horrible. That's a time where it should be all hands on deck. Women and children first, all hands on deck. Bail, sailor, bail. You know, to quote Maynard James Keenan of Pussifer in one of his songs. But yeah, it's astonishing when you have situations like this and people want to help, and just the mind-boggling bureaucracy and the ineptitude and the snail's pace. I just don't understand the addiction to sticking with a plan that isn't working. You have to call an audible. Once again, another sports analogy. You know I always do it. But you know, in football, you go up to the line of scrimmage. You have a running play called. You look up. You see what the defense is doing. You call out blue 13, blue 13. You just changed it. You called an audible based on what you were seeing. Now it's a passing play because you have better chance of success. You know, these huge bureaucracies, their inability to work audibles into their game plan. It's an example of why big government and having your hand out and relying on other people to take care of you is always a bad idea, because it doesn't mean they're any good at it. It doesn't mean they have the resources. It doesn't mean they're going to do it the right way. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just a tough thing, and it's still not back to normal down there. You know, there's still plenty of problems going on.
It's not just not back to normal. Fire Island power went out a couple weeks ago. Again.
That was during the Cleveland Indians baseball game with Francisco Lindor. You know, when he was down there, he's the hero of Puerto Rico, the Cleveland Indian. And yeah, I mean, it was like the second day, the whole power went out again. And that place is struggling, man. And if that's a territory of the United States, then we need to treat it not like some sort of stepchild or outdoor pet that comes around and you don't really care about it. Like, step up, do something.
General Honore, who is probably the most respected disaster relief general in world history. He spoke at a private event recently that we were attending, and he said that the response in Puerto Rico is so pitiful by the federal government that he believes that volunteers who were not paid a dime did more to save people in Puerto Rico than the federal government did.
Well, Dan,
And
go ahead.
And at the end of the day, that's kind of the point. It's not just to focus on the negative, and we don't have time to get into everything that we saw in Puerto Rico. I mean, that would be a whole other show.
Right.
But it's not about focusing on the negative. It's about focusing on the positive. All of this negative exists, and yet there's organizations like the Cajun Navy who, you know, had they been in Puerto Rico, they were in Texas, but had they been in Puerto Rico, you know, in Texas, the Coast Guard, with all of its resources, a $7.6 billion budget, the Coast Guard announced that they rescued 4,500 people from the floodwaters in Hurricane Harvey. And that's beautiful. And their teams deserve all of the respect, and it's a very dangerous job. But the Cajun Navy, a ragtag group of guys with boats, with very little experience rescuing people, with a heart for doing it, who were asking for money for gas, rescued 6,000 people.
Wow.
There's something very wrong with those two comparisons. And it's well past time that we are looking to ourselves for our own solution and telling the government, look, we already do most of this better. We're going to take our resources and do that. And if you guys shapen up, then you can get a bit more. But for now, these are the services that are needed, and we're going to be able to direct our resources to these people who do the better job.
Yeah, and I really like that. And I think part of that is this whole conversation about guns and you know, common sense gun control and the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms. You know, in an emergency situation, we are all the first responders. I had to show up. Unfortunately, a neighbor passed away. I was alerted as, you know, someone who generally tries to find solutions to issues in the community, and they came and got me. And, you know, I don't have CPR training, and I had to get somebody else to start CPR, and I had seen it a million times, but I've never done it. I was a first responder, and I didn't have the skill set there. But, you know, if you call for help, it takes minutes and minutes and minutes for somebody to come, if they come at all. You know, with the Second Amendment, we're the first responders. We're the militia. If something pops off right where you're at, you know, you're the first responder. You're the local. You're the one, if there's an active shooter, you're the one that's close enough to defend your own family's life. When seconds count, police are only minutes away. And I think it's just this tendency for government to say, no. We'll take all the guns. No. We'll provide all the defense. No. We'll provide all the food and water and medical stuff. No. We got it. And in the meantime, they don't got it, and they can't do it fast enough to save lives or enough lives.
Right.
And in the meantime, responsible people, you know, and I'll consider myself a responsible person despite the fact that I don't have CPR training. That's just something I have to get caught up on. But, you know, responsible people are then looked at as, no, we actively want to make it more difficult for you to take care of you and yours. Why should the local charity down the road that's been working in your community for 20 years not be able to quickly deliver their stockpile of supplies and enact all of their resources and connections and assistance that they're used to doing? Why should you have to wait 2 weeks for government officials from FEMA or from Puerto Rico to clear through paperwork when people are literally dying? Like, just get the supplies, call the audible, make it happen. So, you know, I do you see the comparison between Second Amendment self-defense, being a first responder, militia, versus kind of what you were talking about there in Puerto Rico?
It can certainly help. We had armed oath keepers who were guarding many of our teams in Puerto Rico. People get desperate in situations like that. You can't blame them. And the criminal elements come out, and they try to take advantage of those situations. You can't blame them. But at the end of the day, empowering the people to do the better job, that is what's necessary. That is what We Do Better is about. That is what's going to bring this country back from where it is to where it needs to be. And that is something I think no matter what your industry is, no matter what your political beliefs are, that we can all join together and say, look, there are many different ideas, there are many different solutions, there are many different innovations, and we should be able to support those innovations rather than dealing with or accepting as the status quo the 200,000 homeless people in California, or accepting as the status quo the fact that infrastructure like dams in California, the fact that nonprofits let the State Department of Water Resources know there was cracks in their dam 5 years before they'd almost washed away 200,000 people. That there's a certain point where the status quo is no longer acceptable, and that you have to give the people the ability to direct their resources toward the right solutions. And that is what We Do Better at WeDoBetter.org is all about.
Excellent, Dan. Good. You got one last plug in there. Okay, so we're kind of wrapping this all up. I got 2 bonus questions for you on our way out the door here. You were discussing something you discovered about your local animal shelter, or whatever animal shelter it was, and one of the things that I do and I've done for this community is really working to help reduce the stray animal population, and to get animals neutered and spayed, and try to find forever homes, and help out with the shelters, and a lot of different organizations doing a lot of different work. What did you recently find out about this animal shelter, and how that relates to what you're working on now? Because I found it pretty interesting, and I still don't even fully understand the whole story of what you found, how you found it, and why they're doing it that way.
So, I mean, the gist of it is there is a lost animal, and went down to the shelter to go see if the animal was there, and what it would cost to pick it up and everything. And the shelter wanted to charge about $150 to pick up any animal that was lost there. And it just kind of outraged me at a fundamental level, because the shelters, I didn't ask them to go and grab my lost animal, and they are saying, well, it's a fee for our services and stuff like that. First of all, the shelter is funded by the government. It's funded by the county government. I pay taxes for that. If I'm going to pay taxes, I want them to go toward the right things, and having a fee that only pops up when a person is in there, just trying to rescue their best friend, that is one of the worst types of things to do to people of the community, I think. I mean, it's almost like I got into what could hardly be categorized as a car wreck once, but it was a car wreck, and the officer ticketed me for getting in a wreck. It's like, okay, so here's some insult to injury. You have to deal with insurance companies, you deal with all kinds of things, but also we're going to fine you because we can. And that's what it seems to be at this animal shelter, and there's no really argument that I should have to pay, $150, $200, whatever, to rescue or to keep them from permanently kidnapping my best friend. And at the end of the day, the shelter, serves a good purpose in the community. But I think that fee would go down considerably if I were able to say, okay, you want to do that? Well, now I'm taking my taxes and I'm sending it somewhere else.
I'll work with this local animal shelter that aren't jerks about it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, that's very fair. Yeah, animal shelters, they're not shelters, by the way. If you adopt a pet, you adopt it for life. You should set up somebody. Honestly, there's too many people that get some cute animal when it's young. A couple years in, they go, I don't want this, and they just throw it away. They'll either throw it outside or give it to a shelter. You take a grown pet to a shelter, you should just kill it yourself, because that's what they're doing. They don't shelter, they don't protect. Most of these shelters, unless it's specifically a no-kill shelter, they put it up for adoption. Nobody's interested. They come and kill them. I mean, so be responsible with your pets. And yeah, it's just an issue that I spend a lot of time on, because, in our neighborhood, you get a couple irresponsible people, let a couple of animals outside, and they're not spayed and neutered. Now you have 20 of them. Okay, now what? So it's like it's tough. It's very tough. But yeah, insult to injury there, that's pretty weak. Final question then, Dan Johnson. Thank you for taking the time to join us again today, though, by the way. The Boy Scouts, the Scouts, the Girl Scouts, camping in the woods, and 6th grade pregnancies. Tell me about what your thoughts are on the Scouts taking the boy out of it. I know it's not a brand new thing, but, the story's kind of making their way around again. getting closer to implementation. Tell us where you came through in that system, and what your thoughts are on the evolution of the Scouts.
Well, I think that what I'm willing to say publicly about it, and everyone has their own opinions as far as what's actually worth talking about. Connor Boyack, who is the head of the Libertas Institute in Utah, created or wrote a fantastic article back when the Scouts agreed to allow homosexual leaders to teach as Scoutmasters. He wrote a great article of that the LDS Church, which just announced that it was going to sever its 100-plus year relationship with the Boy Scouts, that the LDS Church should separate, but not for the social reasons. And I would just encourage everyone to really read that article, understand that while the Scouts is still, I think, a good program, a lot of what the Scouts were set up for has been lost, and some of the more insidious beliefs of the founder of the Scouts have started to become ingratiated in the Scouts, like the last president of the Scouts happened to be Bush's Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates. The honorary president of the Scouts is the President of the United States. The rampant statism, if you will, and demand for unquestionably following orders, especially with the introduction of people like Gro Harlem Brundtland, who is on the UN Climate Change Commission as an ambassador for the Scouts, that unfortunately I feel as an Eagle Scout that the program is going in the wrong direction, but I think the social issues and concerns are actually a distraction from the real problems with the program. And if anybody wants, I would encourage them to look up Connor Boyack and check out his article on the Scouts.
How do you spell that last name? Connor what?
Boyack.
Okay, the Connor Boyack article. Yeah, I'll have to take a look at that. So you don't care that boys and girls are mixing, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts joining as one? No big deal?
I think that of all the issues that are there to talk about, that's not an issue that's really worth discussion. So I have my own private opinions on it.
But that's what I'm trying to get at. I'm trying to peel back the layer of the onion to find out what your private opinion is. No, I mean, look, you can understand that indoctrination about climate change and big government and blind allegiance to the state. Yeah, those are obvious. But, all right, how about the petty stuff? Are you okay with Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts going on the same camping trip? Like, does it make sense? Is it totally cool, no big deal, or is this not a great plan in your estimation? Because I was in the Scouts too. I couldn't imagine being a young boy hanging out with girls in the woods and taking off and doing things and stuff. I
will say I like the way the Scouts are planning on implementing it. They're going to have all boy troops. They're going to have some troops that if they want to go co-ed, they can. And then they're going to have troops that if they want to be all-girl troops, they also can. This is more of a move to compete with the Girl Scouts than anything.
So the Girl Scouts don't have to change their name and let boys in?
Oh, of course not. But the Boy Scouts tend to be the bigger organization, and they've been losing a lot of members recently. So they need to have an influx of membership, and the organization does. So they're moving. That's more of a business decision, if you will, than some sort of socio-political decision by the Boy Scouts, regardless of the implications it might have. I think that the way that they're going about implementing it is the smart way to do it, to allow the troops to make decisions. I mean, if you remember the Venturing Scouts, that's always been a part of Boy Scouts. Girls and boys were together in Venture Scouts. Girls and boys were together in Rangers. There's always been programs under the Scouting umbrella that have been co-ed programs. Sometimes it works, other times it doesn't. And so I appreciate that if the Boy Scouts are going down this path, the way that they're going about it, of you don't have to integrate. You can be an integrated troop, you can be an all-boy troop, or you can be an all-girl troop, is probably the correct way to go about it.
All right. Well, we'll follow it and keep posted on it. I did not go as far into the Scouts as you did, of course, but yeah, I mean, I took a lot of good lessons away from it. I thought I really dug the camping and all, learning how to, get all the patches and the Pinewood Derby and the, all of the things. I liked this stuff. It was pretty cool, and
Uh-huh.
it was kind of interesting to see that that's happening and just trying to figure out why. And yes, there will be a temporary influx when everybody's available to it, but you wonder if that's like drinking a Red Bull and thinking that that's solved your energy problems for the week. It's like, well, no, that was a burst, that was a quick boost, but now what is this? Is there something fundamentally off here?
And as a data guy, that is why I won't take a position on it. I want to see how I don't have any control or any influence over their decision making. I want to see how I can see the arguments from both sides, and I want to see how this plays out.
Well, no, and I'm glad you said that, because at one point here in a lot of conversations, I struggle to not jump in and interrupt when I have something to say, because I want to hear what you have to say, and that's why you're the guest, not me. But one of the things I wanted to get to, and I totally forgot until this very final thing, and we'll wrap it on this, Dan. When you were talking about the Detroit, was that the Detroit Threat Management Center? When you're talking about
Uh-huh.
Saved in America, and you're looking at data, you know, that is what I wanted to see out of Obamacare. I didn't vote for Obama either time. I didn't support him. I'm generally not a fan of many, many things that he did. When Obamacare was being pushed through, and you heard the conversation about what can we do with our health care, my idea always was try 50 different plans in 50 different states. Have a couple of years to try some of these theories and find out what's working in Illinois and what failed in Honolulu. Well, at Hawaii. Compare state to state and go, we've had some massive successes here trying this. Maybe we could roll this out to the whole East Coast. Maybe we could try this in half the states and figure it out together with a whole bunch of beta tests to come up with a grand plan of how we can determine the best way to deliver affordable, quality healthcare. We didn't get that. We got so many we got stacks of paperwork that nobody has read or understood, and it just instantly took over 1/6 of our economy. I never liked that as a theory. I like trying things out, like you said. Take a look at Arizona and their $200 yearly allowance to redirect some of their tax funds. Double it to $400. Let's check the results there for a little bit. Let's legalize marijuana in California and Colorado. Wait a few years, check the data, check the results. I like testing and checking before you just launch in and try these grandiose plans to fundamentally transform the United States of America, when the thing that's broken, it might actually be better than your theoretical solution. So I like that, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a perfect place to end this. Being a data guy, and I am the same. I want to see, I want to test, I want to look at it, I want to ponder before we roll it out and implement it and make it mandatory. And I think that that's a big part of what you're doing with We Do Better, is working with local people who can do better. You're trying it out, you're testing it out, you're getting the data, and then you can take that data back to the people, back to those government agencies, and say, hey, either step up your game or we're going to play our own game. Once again, keeping in the sports analogy. So, Dan Johnson, any final words on your way out the door, sir? And like I said, thank you again for joining us. Final thoughts.
Final thoughts is one of the reasons Obamacare failed is because it was a grand plan. Grand plans are nice in theory, and they're nice for Hollywood, but at the end of the day, everyone is an individual with their own individual experiences, with their own individual issues. I mean, heck, especially when it comes to healthcare. The number of times doctors can say, I don't know still, and we've had a healthcare system around the world for several hundred years.
Yeah.
There's so many things we don't know just about how the human body works, much less about how the human mind and how the human heart works. And at the end of the day, you've heard the term 50 laboratories of democracy, describing the 50 states. That, we'll try something here, we'll see how it works, we'll try something here, we'll see how it works. I might suggest that why limit ourselves? There are about 800 to 900,000 nonprofit organizations that provide human services. Why not have 800,000 laboratories for solving problems rather than just limiting ourselves to 50, and those 50 that are controlled by politicians. And at the end of the day, that is what We Do Better is about. Let's find the best practices. Let's find them as quickly as possible. And the best way to do that, let everybody work from their own angle. And somebody will find those practices, and then those practices can spread among everyone else solving that problem. And those 500,000 laboratories of democracy can actually lead us into a greater age of innovation and of freedom than just trying to limit ourselves to grand plans, whether it's for states or for an entire nation.
I like it. I think that's what we were set up to be. This has all been bastardized and blown out of proportion, consolidated and scammed, and schemed and connived and rigged over the years. I mean, it's you don't need to believe in conspiracy theories to understand that people in power want to keep that power. In order to do that, you got to kind of set the system up to a way where you can succeed, at least so you know how the rules are being played and you're playing them to their optimum proficiency so that you have a chance to win. I think the only way, and that's a natural thing. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. This is a tale as old as time. You can go back through all recorded written history. The stories are there. That's why you need to have some sort of basic limitation on the size and scope of how out of control and domineering this whole system has become. You have to make sure that the people working in the communities are the ones who are from those communities, because they are their brothers and sisters. They're not just animals to be herded up like some uncaring animal shelter to be shipped off into a cage, if you will, to keep with that analogy. So, I'm really interested. I want to do some more research here onto Arizona and what they did last year, getting $52 million redirected from 130,000 taxpayers of $200. Very curious to see what happens when that gets doubled to 400, because that's, like you said, being a data guy, look at the results, look at what happens, and tell us one more time about the bill, where to show up, what's going on in California next week, so that everybody can show up, participate, learn a little bit, and maybe speak their piece. Where is that one more time?
The bill is SB 1485, introduced by State Senator Mike Morrell. It'll be heard on May 16th at 10 o'clock a.m. in the State Governance and Finance Committee. That's May 16th, Wednesday, in Sacramento, California, at the state capitol. You can find more information by Facebooking Flood the Committee for SB 1485, and also finding We Do Better on Facebook, WeDoBetter.org, and We Do Better on Twitter. Thanks so much for having me on, Brian.
All right, Dan, you have a great day. To be continued, good sir. Keep up the good work, and let's try to do another have another conversation a little sooner. That I don't remember the last one we had, but let's try to do another one a little sooner than it took to get this one together, because it's always interesting, it's always enlightening, it's always thought-provoking, it's always challenging, it's always interesting. Mostly it's always interesting having you on, talking about some of the stuff you're up to, and I'm always curious to see about what happens next. So thank you for your time. You have a great day, sir, and I'll talk with you again soon. And for everybody out there in the TNAM network, I just want to thank you for participating. Subscribe, youtube.com/The New American Media, patreon.com/The New American Media, instagram.com/The New American Media, on Twitter at American_media_, and facebook.com/The New American Media. Brian Engelman, signing out. We do better. I really like this idea in theory. But as Homer Simpson said, communism works in theory. In theory. So let's test it and see what we got. All right, thanks, guys. We'll talk to you again soon.